So supposedly there's an experimental drug to help with cannabis addiction, something that doesn't actually exist. And if we really want to go after addiction, let's deal with the opioid crisis.
A new experimental drug tonight shows some positive results for treating cannabis addiction. And you may be thinking, well, wait a second, what even is cannabis addiction? How do you do that in the first place? Because oftentimes people think, well, that's not really something that happens with pot. Well, there sure is such thing as cannabis addiction, and experts say there's a need to do something about it because 14 million Americans struggle with what's called cannabis use disorder in 2021, according to the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration.
Like, what are these people like smoking so much cannabis all the time that they're like not doing anything? Because there's like millions of Americans that are using cannabis for medicine.
It comes at a time when 23 states, plus D.C. and Guam, have legalized recreational cannabis, making it more widely available. Dr. Akshay Sayal is joining us now. So let me first start. Let's set aside the cannabis addiction piece. Let's start with this drug. Why is it so promising? Why are we even talking about this new drug in the first place?
Yeah, so Hallie, did you know there are no FDA-approved treatments for cannabis use disorder right now? A disorder that's affecting 14 million people across the country, and there's really no effective treatments for it.
Okay, but how are these people being negatively affected by smoking cannabis? You can show the negative effects of opioid use, alcohol use, and various other hard drugs. So let's see the negative effects of cannabis.
And so that's what makes this so exciting. And the reason it's promising, Hallie, is because, the reason we don't have, or part of the reason we don't have a treatment for this is because previous drugs that we've tried, when you try to block the way cannabis or marijuana works in the brain, it can lead to nasty side effects like mood disorders and even suicidal ideation, meaning thoughts of suicide. And so what makes this drug so different is that it can actually go to that receptor, and instead of totally blocking it, it can just tweak it a little bit. So it can prevent you from getting high, while avoiding those nasty side effects that have made this such a difficult disorder to treat in the past.
So that's the drug. What about the addiction piece itself? Because it seems like there's sometimes this stereotype, like, well, you can't get addicted to weed. Like, that's not a thing that happens. It actually is a thing that happens.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Contrary to popular belief, you can actually develop an addiction to marijuana. This is something that, anywhere from 10 to 30% of people who use marijuana develop a cannabis use disorder, a marijuana use disorder. And so what do we mean by that? The key really here is when you're using so much marijuana that it's starting to interfere with your life in terms of, you're struggling with work and school, you're having trouble maintaining relationships, you're giving up things that you used to do, maybe some hobbies like you used to play an instrument or play a sport that you're not just finding you can't do anymore because you're needing to keep going back and back to that cannabis.
Right, that's not happening to anyone, that people are just smoking cannabis and like doing nothing else. Like, no, that is just a laugh. Show these people that can't function in society because all they want to do is smoke cannabis. Because you won't find those people.
And that's when it becomes a problem, Hallie.
Can you talk through the legalization aspect here, right? Because there are substances, like, for example, there is such thing as alcohol abuse, and alcohol is legal. It is a legal substance to be sold, right? So in other words, something that has a potential to be abused doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be legalized. Where does that discussion stand in the medical community?
Yeah, I think most people that I've talked to in the medical community, they're pretty for legalization. I think the caveat here is we need to be smart about this, and we need to do this in a proper way. And I'll give you an example. When you go to a liquor store to buy a bottle of wine or whiskey, you can see the percent of alcohol that's in the bottle, whether it's 40% in spirits or 10 to 15 with wine. With marijuana, we don't really have any regulation like that. And what we're seeing over the decades is that the marijuana that our kids are using today is not what their parents were smoking. It's way more potent, and that can lead to more addiction and more mental health effects.